Welcome. We're really excited to have you all here. Um, this is the second in our series, our Bauta series of Where Does Your Seed Come From? My name is David Katzel. I'm the regional coordinator of the Bauta program from British Columbia, and I'll be your host today. And we'd like to start. We always like to start before we dive into all the topics of just taking a moment to recognize we're all calling in from different unceded territories around different places. We'd like to recognize the seed keepers whose care and knowledge and stewardship have made all the crop diversity we benefit from today. Across all of the lands that we're on, Indigenous seed keepers have preserved seeds, they've nurtured varieties, they've carried forward stories with those seeds and practices and traditions, even in the face of colonization and ongoing inequities. So through the care of their seeds, they sustain traditional crop varieties, protected food systems, passed on cultural knowledge, and they've support the health and resilience and self-determination of their communities. And as we reflect, we might think about the ways each of us can nurture and support that work of strengthening seed sovereignty. This can include all the work that you may be doing caring for seeds, but it could also include supporting language revitalization, engaging in land back initiatives, and helping sustain the knowledge and traditions that have kept communities and ecosystems thriving. And as we explore seeds and where they come from and how they're cultivated and the systems that support them, we invite you to hold those stories and relationships in mind, and let this reflection guide our conversations today, inspire curiosity and care, and help us engage with seed systems in ways that honor justice, respect, and sovereignty. As we dig in, I'm really excited to have both Aaron Varadi and Edmund Frost with us here today. Um, Edmund is a contract production manager, commercial grower, sales representative for high mowing seeds and has lots of experience in production and breeding and variety trials. And Edmund is managing director of Commonwealth Seed Growers in Virginia, a farmer breeder focused on cucurbits, downy mildew resistance, and regional OP seed production. And I'm going to let them do a much better introduction of themselves. So, Aaron, go feel free to unmute yourself and give us a little bit of an introduction.
All right. Hi, folks. It's nice to be here. Thanks for showing up. Yeah, my name's Aaron. I work with High Mowing Organic Seeds. I am based in Olympia, Washington, but the company is based in Vermont. Part of my job is managing the contract productions at High Mowing. So in our catalog, we offer somewhere between 700 and 800 varieties, and about 30% of those are contract productions. And so I'm working with growers about like negotiating contracts, crop planning, technical assistance, things of that nature. I also do some sales here as well. This is my sixth season at High Mowing. Prior to that, for about 10 years, I farmed in Northwest Washington. A lot of mixed vegetables, but also a lot of seed crops. Dry seeded stuff out here. It's cool and dry climate, which is really well suited for beets, spinach, brassicas, lettuce, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Looking forward to it.
So I'm Edmund. I'm in Central Virginia, and I've been doing seed farming here for about 18 years. Um, I'm part of Twin Oaks Intentional Community, which is a 100-person um, income sharing community. I've actually been a little bit in and out of Twin Oaks, but I've been in the neighborhood here um, for that 18 years. And um, so a little bit about our farm. We have about 7 acres in rotation. We do a good bit of seed production, and we also do breeding and variety trialing, and we funded some of that with grants. Um, and the name of the farm is Twin Oaks Seed Farm. But then I also run um, a retail seed uh, seed company called Commonwealth Seed Growers. So we sell seeds that we grow here, and then also from about 6 or 7 other farms. Um, and we focus on varieties that really do well on our farms in the Southeast. We've got growers in Virginia, Tennessee, and um, and North Carolina. And we have a lot of stuff that we've bred ourselves or done a lot of selection work with. Um, and we also just do stewardship on existing varieties that we think are really good. Um, we're certified organic. And something else, I'm part of a group called Seed Worker Organizing, which is a um, US and Canada based um, just sort of collaborative seed grower um, project. It's we have monthly meetings, we have monthly meetups. We're doing work on how to make seed growing contracts more fair and also on seed source transparency. I think I'll leave it at that.
Okay, great. Well,
Excited to
we
be
will.
here.
Yeah, great. Great to have both of you. We will just jump in. And the way this will go is I'm just going to ask some questions related to, we have sort of 3 topic areas. So the first one we're going to be talking about is how open pollinated seeds are produced and maintained. And there's some bullet points here, but I'm just going to ask some questions and then call on our 2 speakers to talk about them. So the first one being talk about approaches to maintaining varietal purity in OP seed production, including systemic approaches to maintaining OP varieties.
Um, it's just such a big question and it's different for, every type of plant. But I guess what I want to say is that it's a lot of work to maintain quality varieties. You really have to look at what's good about the variety in all kinds of ways and do roguing and selection to keep it that way or to potentially improve it a little bit for your climate. And that's definitely, even though we're doing breeding work, that variety maintenance is still kind of at the center of what we do.
Did you want to add anything, Aaron?
Yeah, I'd say first you ought to know what you're looking for, like depending on the uniformity of the population you're starting with. And if you're trying to really either maintain or improve a variety, there's a couple different ways of varying degrees of rigor. You could do negative selection, where you're basically just pulling out the plants that you don't like. Maybe they're off type, they've got a trait you don't like, the stature isn't quite what you're looking for. But if you really want to get down to business and make some quicker progress, you can do positive selection, where you're only picking out the best of the best, um, and then ignoring maybe like 85–90% of the rest of the population and just picking out the premium. Yeah, everything I mentioned, it's a lot of observation, a lot of looking at the same plant 4 times and then overthinking it and realizing you should just went with your gut the first time, at least for me. Um, but yeah, I mean, people have been doing this for thousands of years. You keep what you like, you get rid of what you don't like, essentially.
Great. And I think that speaks to the question. Susan had a question, a clarifying question in the chat. Just what do you mean by deroguing exactly? I didn't know if I heard deroguing, but I think I
Oh
think that
yeah.
was both
I
spoke.
just meant I think I said rogue. I meant to say roguing.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah.
And roguing is just removing those plants that you don't like, and then
Yeah.
the opposite is keeping the ones you do. Yeah.
Something else I wanted to say is we've used the concept of stock seed a lot because we're doing seed production and I do seed production for other seed companies as well as for our project. So we can't just keep the seeds that the plants that we like the best because we're trying to sell, produce a volume of seeds to sell. But then on top of that, um, we also save what we think is best for the next time we do that seed grow out. So we might do some roguing for the general production, but then we would do some positive selection on top of that, and we call it stock seed.
Okay, great. So just moving on, how do isolation distances, population size, selection methods differ across crops? Very broad question.
Ooh, I can try in 30 seconds or less.
Sure, yeah, do a 30 second.
Um, it depends on what type of crop you're working with. If it's a crop that pollinates itself, you can have a smaller population size and less of an isolation distance. So things like lettuce, tomatoes, peppers, um, maybe population of 20 or more, isolation distance of like 5 to 50 feet. If you're dealing with crops that cross-pollinate either by insects or wind, you're looking at populations of, I try to do at least 100, isolation distance of at least a half mile for insect pollinated crops, up to a couple miles. Some say 5 miles for wind pollinated crops, depending on how hard it blows where you are.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I would say um, I agree with a lot of that. We do use some smaller isolation distances, and but this is in the context of really observing um, how things come out when you're, you know, when you're using the isolations that you are using. I find that having woods in between um, two plots really helps a lot.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be consensus on required isolation distance. So you have to kind of find what you're comfortable with, is what I find. But yeah, if there's natural barriers in the way, for sure, that can shorten the distance.
And it
Yes,
can vary by region, also depending what kind
Mhm.
of pollinating insects you have.
I guess like all farming, it comes down to actually just learning from your land and knowing your land, and every piece of land and location is different. What kind of challenges have you faced in maintaining sort of consistency of open pollinated crops, Aaron?
Um, Things tend to drift, like genetics are going to do what they want to do. And if you don't put at least some effort into selecting every generation, things can kind of get away from you. Sometimes that's a breeding project opportunity. Like there's a cool mutation that you haven't seen before. Maybe you can separate that one out. But for our contract productions, we do write in a certain amount of roguing of selection. And if it's any more than I think we say like 5% of the population, then we can talk. But yeah, it should just be a matter, like it should just be part of your production plan, part of your maintenance plan. Um, and if it gets forgotten, that's when, the genetics can kind of get away from you. You just have to pay attention.
Great.
Um, it's definitely something I put a lot of thought into, and I would say, you know, sometimes you think you're going in the direction and using the right kind of stock seed selection method, and it turns out to not be what you want exactly down the line. So just really takes a lot of thought and observation to do that selection in a good way. Um, you could be selecting for yields, and then you end up deselecting eating quality, stuff like that. Or you might inadvertently, there's a pepper that I work with where it's gotten shorter, and I'm not sure why. It's still great, but I didn't actually want it to get shorter.
Maybe do you want to briefly touch on what goes into breeding, trialing, and variety improvement beyond just maintaining a crop?
So yeah, we do a lot of work here with trialing and breeding, and I definitely see that as part of what makes a regional seed system work well. You've got to see what's out there that's good. Um, that's always the first step. So just trying lots of stuff and then thinking about what the needs are and what isn't available, and then from there you can move into doing plant breeding work with often crosses between standouts in the trials that have different kinds of positive traits, and then you combine them and um, just the power of combining different things is really awesome in terms of just like how much um, you get something a little bit like both parents and everything in between, and then all this other stuff. And I just I guess the other thing I want to say is it takes a long time. So it can be easy to think that, when you're doing selections that you find that great plant and you think you've got it, but um, but that plant you don't know what the male parent is maybe, or um, the next year it doesn't look the same, and you just have to keep doing the selection, and it kind of takes a while for it to really work. But it you know it is a powerful way to work with seeds, and um, you can get a lot done. Um, and then there's also the question of how to fund that kind of work, and we've done some of that with grants. Um, we've done a lot of it just putting in our own time, not really being funded. Some of it by breeding varieties that are kind of just now starting to bring in revenue, to cover those kind of expenses, but it takes a long time.
Yeah, so on that note, is it challenging to make a living growing and working with OP crops?
Um, I definitely think it's a challenging, uh, it's challenging being a farmer at all in terms of being able to make a living, and doing seed production is no exception. Um, so a lot of the sort of like networking and organizing that I've done around seeds with people is has to do with trying to figure out how we can uh, make enough of a living that we can support being able to keep doing the work.
Um, okay, and in terms of we're just going to go to labor, skill, and infrastructure. What skills in labor and infrastructure are required to produce reliable OP seed? I think both of you can speak to that.
You want to start, Aaron?
Sure. You got to know what you're working with. Like discussed previously, like how it pollinates, how many plants you should have, their spacing, all that stuff. Infrastructure, can be as simple as a bunch of Rubbermaid totes and buckets and tarps and box fans. Doesn't have to get too sophisticated. So, depending on the crop you're working with, like the barrier to entry can be pretty low. But once you start, in my opinion, once you start doing it on a commercial level, at least some type of mechanized seed cleaner can be really helpful to do the final cleaning. Um, and then labor, knowing your timing is really important. When I was growing the seed crops, I was also growing fresh veg. Quite a few of our contract growers do the same. Um, Fresh veg, in my experience, is very hectic. It's like a very frantic weekly schedule where you're like watering, weeding, harvesting. It's a bit of a rat race, in my opinion. And it's really easy to turn around in July and see, oh, my bok choy seed is like starting to shatter on the ground. So knowing the cycles of the crops you're working with and just making sure that you're giving them the attention they need. They're not that labor intensive throughout most of their life cycle, but like they really need you there at the critical times. So just having that planned out and knowing when you should be paying attention is important as well, I'd say.
Um, the most important piece of infrastructure that we have is a drying room. It's just too hot and humid here to dry and store a lot of kinds of seeds the way they need to be. Um, so we have an insulated room that has both an air conditioner and a dehumidifier, and we have a drying rack, which is it's like 2 foot by 2 foot screens that slide into it's kind of like a I don't know, like a shelf, but the screens slide in and out. Um, we do so much with that, and having that dehumidified space is critical. And beyond that, you can do so much with buckets and bins and fans, and tarps. Uh, and yeah, you know, looking into seed cleaners is great, but you can do a lot with simple equipment too.
Okay. You guys, can you walk us through just a typical season from planting, harvesting, cleaning to storage?
You want to start?
Okay. For us, something that's different with seed production versus vegetable production is we're not doing a lot of successions and we're not necessarily trying to get the earliest of things. Um, so we tend to start our transplants in late March, early April, in an unheated or sometimes minimally heated greenhouse. Um, and things don't, you know, we don't have our frost-free season doesn't start till May, so that's when things get busy, and we're just like we're planting into moving into a lot of cultivating and weeding and hoeing, moving into by August we're starting to harvest stuff. There's some exceptions. Brassicas we're harvesting earlier, but for the most part our harvest season is August through October. Um, it starts with tomatoes and it moves into beans, okra, peppers, and the last thing is winter squash. And we just had our first frost last week, so now we've got a lot of that stuff in, but we still have a lot more work to do getting the seeds out and fully cleaned and processed. So we'll actually, I'll be pretty busy until till Christmas.
On the seed company side, we are going to start figuring out what we need in the next month or so. And so then I'm figuring out how many pounds of what varieties we need. And then I reach out to growers and set up those contracts, send them stock seed, hopefully in like January, February, depending on what the crop is. And then, yeah, helping them with any issues that are happening throughout the season, whether in the growth or the harvest and cleaning. And then, as of a couple weeks ago, we're starting to receive lots that were produced this year. So taking germination samples, helping folks with cleaning, um, setting up shipments to arrive here. And yeah, hopefully everything's in the door by the first of the year. That doesn't happen, but that's the intent.
Um, how does Aaron, for you, how does testing and quality control ensure like consistent seed quality?
There's a lot of testing starting with the stock seed that we send folks. I'm doing that right now, going through all the things we might need to contract this coming year, checking our stock seed lots and making sure we've got recent germination tests on those. Anything longer than 2 years ago, I like to have it tested. For certain crops, there's diseases that we test for too, like lettuce mosaic virus, tobacco mosaic virus, tomato brown rugose fruit virus, and then all the brassicas we're testing for FOMA and xanthomonas. And then for the seed that we receive, it's kind of the same regime of tests too, germination tests. We've got a cleaning mill on site in Vermont where we can do some final cleaning for lots that still need it, and then those same disease screenings we do as well. Some of them we can treat, some we can't. But yeah, it's important to do testing all the way through because you don't want stock seed to show up and it doesn't germinate at all because the last room test was 4 years ago, which doesn't happen anymore,
We
but
have
it
we have a,
sometimes happens.
we have a smaller number of varieties that we're working with. Um, so I kind of have a personal like idea of uh of how of what to expect from the stock seed lots, but we still definitely germ test them. Um, and germ testing is a baseline. We also do some hot water seed treatment. Um, some of that on for seed that we're selling. Usually we do it for seed that we're planting. Um, and that's, certain kinds of seed, tomatoes and brassicas is the focus with that. And then we do um, some disease testing as well.
Okay, great. Well, that's the getting the seeds into the seed company. Now, just moving on to market and commercial trends. Um, why have seed companies and farmers, I'd say, moved away from OP varieties over the last 75 years? Or have they? So,
Really big question. I've only ever worked for one seed company, um, and I don't feel like we fall in this category. But from what I've heard from folks over the years, hybrids, which are the alternative to open pollinated varieties, while they are a lot of work, they can be like a relatively shorter journey to the traits that you're looking for. Because if a breeder's got a bunch of inbred parent lines that all have different traits, you can kind of mix and match those and maybe get something that works for the slot you're looking for, like certain days maturity, certain disease resistance, habit, whatever. And they are, they're uniform, they're reliable, and I feel like the seed industry, of course, has developed side by side with the food industry. And as farmers are getting bigger and growing more and more cases of a certain thing, like if they've got a wholesaler coming on, June 16th and they need 2,000 cases of broccoli, like you, as a farmer, you need to be sure that that the seed you're planting is all going to be ready the third week of June. And so hybrids lend themselves better to that as well. This is just a suspicion, but having some knowledge of how capitalism works, I also wonder if the nature of the parent lines and who controls them plays a part. Because, like, if a company has all these parent lines and they're like kept secret which parent lines are going to make which F1s, like it's a de facto a patent basically. Like they're the only ones who know what that is and have access to it. So it would give them a market advantage as well. Um, whereas open pollinated seed, like you can put different types of intellectual property restrictions on it nowadays, but still like OP seed is gonna yield the same OP variety.
Yeah, a lot of it is, I think, about the economics of it, where, if you have a hybrid where what you're the only one who knows what the parents are, then you control that variety. Whereas OPs, and that creates a source of funding for doing the research work. And the problem with OPs, and I know this as someone who's done a lot of research and breeding work with OPs, is that it's really hard to fund it. Um, so, in a certain way, I can understand um, why people want to do hybrids, um, for that funding reason. Um, but then the downside with hybrids is that you can lose it. A variety that a lot of farms rely on could just be there could be a decision by a seed company, some other part of the world to pull that variety, and then you lose it. So there's a lot more resilience in OPs. Um, and I guess I don't feel certain about to what extent um, the trend, the move towards hybrids with a lot of crops is about the biology of hybrids, and to what extent it's about um, the economics. For some crops, I think it's really just the economics. And for some crops, maybe, corn and broccoli, you really see that advantage. There really is a clear advantage of hybridization, um, that maybe could also be achieved through open pollinated breeding. But, there are those biological reasons. But uh, as someone who's, you know, really struggled to fund doing OP breeding, I can understand why a seed company wants to focus on hybrids, unfortunately.
Yeah, and you spoke to this a bit, is just that there are some crops that remain, OPs remain central for crops like beans, peas, peanuts, lettuce, some herbs and flowers. Um, and so maybe you've spoken to that a bit, but did both of you want to talk about why those have remained OP dominated?
I can talk about that, but just to go back, something you said, Edmund, reminded me of. I think another part of the reason farms have moved away from OP varieties is because there's not been a lot of time and energy put into them by these bigger seed companies with the resources because they're
Right.
spending most of their resources on the F1s. And OPs have kind of been neglected. And I've heard a lot of people argue that OPs could be just as uniform, just as vigorous, just as high yielding as hybrids, but like you need to invest time and resources into them. And now more people are, it seems like. But I do think like the neglect of OPs is part of the reason farmers are moving away from them because if you grow an OP that hasn't been maintained next to an F1, like farmers are going to see like that F1 does way better for me. And I'm working with so many things that are going against me anyway. Like I need the crop to perform.
I have a goal with my work, which is I don't just want to have the best OP. I want to have something that fills a niche that a hybrid isn't filling either. Um, and I think that we might speak about this later. There's another question about regional seed systems, but um, doing regional adaptation with open pollinated varieties and regional breeding like really has strength that hybrids don't have. Um, so I'm really kind of interested in moving away from the narrative of like, oh, OPs are politically better, but they don't really quite work as well. Um, to like, no, if we put the work in with the OPs, actually we can get better results in many cases than what we would get with the hybrids.
Okay, great. I'm going to combine the last two questions here just to move us through this section a little bit. But I guess the question was, are companies still moving away? And they're kind of related to what we've talked about already. Are companies still moving away from OPs today, or has this trend stabilized? And yeah, just talk about emerging trends and maybe new interest in OPs.
I guess that's what I was just kind of touching on is I do think there's a lot of renewed interest, especially in the context of regional adaptation and the power of that to create varieties that really work well for farmers in that region.
Mhm. Yeah, there's a lot of seed companies, and they've all got, to one degree or another, varying goals. I'd say for the bigger multinational breeding companies, like I don't see them moving away from hybrids anytime soon, but there are so many new regional seed companies popping up, doing really great work in OPs, and there's a couple in Europe that we buy from who they're breeding for biodynamics. And I guess in Europe, F1s are difficult to have certified biodynamic, if not impossible. And so their goal is to breed OPs that perform as well as F1s. And there's some really great breeding coming out of their programs, and we've added a bunch of their stuff to our catalog. Um, So yeah, you can't lump all seed companies in one pool, I would say, but I would say, more enthusiasm for OPs now than there has been since I started in the scene 20 years ago.
Okay, great. Well, let's move on. So beyond how they're produced and maintained, who's producing and stewarding OP seeds, just sort of the production landscape. Um, so we're gonna, yeah, talk about who's producing them and how transparency in supply chains matters for growers and buyers. So the sort of opening question under the production landscape is, where are OP seeds produced today? Are they overseas, regionally, locally? Aaron, you want to start?
They're everywhere. Again, I've only got um, knowledge of how we do it here at High Mowing. Um, Most of the seeds we contract are produced in North America. There's a few international exceptions, but there are seeds produced all over the world. A lot of times, and this kind of gets to the regional thing too, like at this point, the seed industry has identified the ideal locations for every species, basically. And so, to minimize their risk and get the best results, they are producing those seeds wherever in the world is best for that crop. It depends on the species, but anything with the that ripens dry is probably going to be grown in an area with dry summers where there's no risk of rain falling on it to ruin it. So the west coast of the US, Chile, Italy, yeah, I mean they're everywhere.
Um, that there can be benefit to producing seeds in not the ideal location, because that way you get the adaptation pressure that you want for, um, that is maybe closer to the conditions that the growers that you're selling to are going for. So, there in a bigger seed system, you might be able to separate the selection and the production to where you're still selecting it in the target location, but then producing it somewhere else. Um, but in most of the scale of seed companies that I'm familiar with, um, there's not that much of that going on, um, and the grow out location is the same as the selection location. Um, an example is like if you care about downy mildew resistance, and this is like one of the big things I work on is cucurbit downy mildew resistance. Um, if all the seed production is happening on the West Coast, that's not going to be, you know, or let's say Colorado, really dry area, that's not going to be on the radar of the people doing the seed production. Um, and in the Southeast, there's fewer seed companies in the Southeast. So if you get to the point where not only the production is somewhere else, but the sort of like stewardship and business is not even in the region, then you're really losing something. And then the other thing I wanted to speak to is that sometimes the choices are made because of the labor economics, um, of the seed production, and that's um, that's something that makes it more challenging for growers in North America to compete with. So that is definitely something that we're dealing with as seed producers, is competing with cheaper labor markets. And you know I I definitely am interested in being in contact with and um, working with seed growers all over the world. But when the dynamic is more about the labor economics, that is something I want to address.
So you may have already spoken to this, but both of you, but feel free to add in. Is the next question was how does a production location affect seed adaptation for local growers? And I think what we mean by production location, you were trying to maybe separate out, Edmund, the like selection location from the production location. I think, Aaron, what you were
Mhm.
talking about is we've identified where you can get the best yield and best probably economic return based on location of the actual seed crop. Is there a lot of like selection for one region but growing out in another happening, or does most of the production and selection happen in the same area?
Well, I guess I'm a little confused on like, are we talking seed adaptation for the seed crop or seed adaptation for the vegetable crop or both?
I guess I guess what I mean is like if there's a watermelon that you really want to adapt to the southeast and you're doing stock seed selection in the southeast, but then you're sending sending that to the west to Colorado to do seed production, that's the scenario I'm kind of talking about as a that could be one way to keep the selection southeast focused, but then have some of the benefits of like the dry season production. But I think that that's not the scale of what we're doing, and I think that is not super common. Does that make sense?
Is that Aaron is that selection for the vegetable that you were talking about? Like, or is that what you were you referring to?
Yeah. Well, I mean, any fruiting crop is kind of its own thing because if you're selecting the seed, you're selecting the vegetable too. Like the melon is the melon. I guess I was thinking more in terms of dry seeded stuff, like carrots or onions, for example.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Because I'm a dry seeded type of
Okay,
person.
I get it. Right.
But like so carrots, I would say the vast majority of carrots people grow all across North America. The seed is produced on the West Coast or like inland Oregon, Washington. But they still like the carrots themselves grow great in Ontario or Quebec. So that's more what I was getting at. But I do think it's worthwhile to also adapt seed crops to a region as well. Because I mean, if you don't, that might just be, like a muscle that atrophies. Like it might get harder and harder to get a decent seed crop in those regions if no
Right.
one's ever trying it.
Is there a scenario where people would grow carrots on the East Coast and send the roots back for seed production to the West?
I actually did that a few times with a seed company in New York. Yeah, they would grow the carrots, select all the stecklings, and then ship them to me in the spring, and we'd plant them out.
Right. Um, so with Commonwealth seed growers, the direction we've taken with this is just like um to really try to simplify it for people and say like we're just going to do this all regionally and keep it simple in that way. Um, you'll know where all the seeds come from and it's all regional. Um, I don't think that's the only good way to do it, but I think it is definitely a good way to do it, um, and that um, I think there's a lot of strength to it.
Okay, great. Okay, we're gonna dig into a bit of transparency in seed sourcing now. So how important is it for growers to know where a seed was grown and who produced it?
I'm interested. I have this concept that if people know more about where the seed was produced, um, growers there'll be more recognition for the seed growers, for the people doing the growing and the selection, and that those people will be more economically empowered. Um, so I'm interested in seed source transparency for that reason. Um, I think that it can also be um, beneficial for the grower to know more about where the seed was produced. You could buy red Russian kale from a seed company and maybe, but you don't know where that seed was produced. And then the next year, the seed company has actually switched to a different source, and you're not growing the same thing the next year because that seed company has switched and you weren't aware of the original source. So it can actually be beneficial to the produce grower to know a little bit more about the source of seeds. And so I'm really interested in like advocating for this as something that farmers and gardeners are asking for and that seed companies are offering. And I know that um, it's kind of a maybe a hard thing to get started on because I think a lot of people don't know that they don't know where the seed comes from. They think that it just, well, I got it from this company, which is, located somewhere close to me, but they don't know that that company is sourcing in all kinds of different ways. Um, and yeah, I'm interested in having that be a value that's sort of more understood and asked for. I think that it has potential to improve our our seed systems and outcomes. Aaron, I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Thanks. Yeah, I was just debating whether or not I should bring it up. I do think, yeah, I mean, I always love to know where things are coming from. And a lot of the more regional seed companies I grew for, like they've got in their catalog, they've got a key and a code for each farm that they work with and where like each variety is coming from. For us at High Mowing, that's tricky because we're often dealing with like having multiple lots and inventory from different producers. We often like try to have a backup, like if one supplier doesn't work, we go to another one. But what we really try to do is acknowledge the breeders wherever that is known. Like a lot of the farmer bred varieties that we offer or university bred varieties, we feel like it's important to put that in the catalog so that people start to think about. I just think a lot of people just don't think about where varieties come from. Not to disparage anyone, farming is very hard. They have a lot of things to worry about. But I think even just mentioning, oh, like this was bred by the University of New Hampshire, it makes people realize, oh yeah, like this comes from somewhere, somewhere has to do it. And then we've also, like getting back to your issue of like funding that work, we um pay royalties isn't a there could be a better word, but we contribute an amount of revenue back to the breeders of that variety for every dollar of that variety we sell so that they can continue to do it. Because, yeah, a lot of times, like the breeder's not getting paid until the variety's out in the world, and that can be a decade or more after they start. Um, yeah, yeah, credit where it's due. I think it's important.
And it's my understanding that High Mowing really kind of took the lead on giving really good royalties in that way a number of years ago. Um,
Yeah, before
but
my
yeah,
time. But yeah, I think I'm glad we do I think it's important.
there's it's so complex. There's who grew the physical seeds that you're planting, but then there's also who maintained that variety, who bred that variety, um, and where did that seed come from further back? It's there's a lot to it, and I'm just hopeful that that we can get more into that as a movement. I think it can um, strengthen what we're doing.
So maybe you have spoken to this a bit already. Feel free to move on if not, but the source transparency is one idea for how growers doing variety maintenance and improvement work can be better recognized and compensated. Is that what you're already speaking to?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because sometimes the person producing the seed is the same one as the person who's doing the maintenance and the breeding, but sometimes they're different people. So, uh, I think the transparency can help with both.
And and I guess if people want to know that, going on to the next question, but feel free to jump in anytime. Aaron is not all seeds sold by regional companies are actually regionally grown. So how can buyers know what they're getting if that's important to them?
I guess it depends on the company. Yeah, another part of my job here is selling seeds to other seed companies. Um, and we do sell to quite a few regional outfits. Yeah, maybe those companies listed on their website. Maybe they would tell you if you inquired.
Right. Um, how does understanding seed origin affect the value and the use of an OP seed?
I spoke to that a little bit earlier of like it's possible to order the same thing from the same company in 2 different years and get something different if you don't know where the further back source was. Um, So I think there is a, besides sort of a seed system value to knowing more about where the seed came from, there is also sort of a direct like benefit to the grower if you can track like, oh, that this is, this brassica is being um, adapted and stewarded and produced in the Northeast as opposed to um, you know Southern California or something. That can be useful information. Though the tricky thing is that there's a lot of complexity and nuance to that information. So it's like kind of once we get there, we have to be willing to, to go into some of that nuance.
Okay, yeah, maybe in the next question we can dig a bit more into into the is how important is it? There's just one more question here, which is what practices or systems help make seed origin and production clearer for growers and buyers? We can skip that and go on if unless you want to talk to that.
Yeah. I mean, one thing is that like companies know where the seeds came from, and so that information is available and something to ask for potentially if you're interested.
Yeah. Okay. All right, well let's jump into the next section. Beyond production, why do OP seed matter for growers, communities, and seed systems? Um, Around scale and suitability, are OP varieties better suited to small scale, mixed, or organic farms?
I respectfully reject that question. I don't think um I don't know if there's anything inherent about OPs and F1s that would exclude them or make them better suited or worse suited for any of these scenarios. It really depends on what you're trying to get out of the crop. Um, if uniformity, if like harvest timing is really important to you, then maybe an F1 is the way to go. But like we mentioned before, like there's no reason OPs can't be as uniform as F1s. Um, yeah, I mean, some OPs I would say are better suited to mixed production, where like if you're doing a CSA, I mean, sometimes a staggered harvest window is nice, like maybe if you've got CSA and farmers market, like you harvest half the broccoli has for CSA, the other half for market. So really, yeah, it depends on what you're trying to have the crop do for you.
Yeah, one thing I noticed with some of our varieties that are really focused on flavor is that those tend to be more um, sought after by farmers who are doing direct marketing rather than wholesale marketing. Um, that doesn't directly speak to the question, but like there's this inverse relationship between squash that tastes good and squash that yields well. I mean, we want to go for both, but um, in a lot of situations, you have two squashes that could weigh the same, and one of them actually has twice the food value of the other one because of the breeding. Um, twice the dry matter, twice the sugar content, and so in a direct marketing, smaller scale situation, that can be like really important to keep those customers coming back. Um, but yeah, I agree with Aaron about like um, scale being, you know, OPs being relevant across all different scales and also hybrids being relevant across different scales.
You want to maybe talk a little bit about the scenarios that they would be better or not? Then the next question's about, what scale does the uniformity trade-off make OPs less viable than hybrids? And also in what situations, maybe it's not just about scale, but which situations are OPs still relevant or even preferable in large scale production?
Well, I think like in my head, it's two things. There's the world as it exists now, and then the world that could be possible if more energy was put into breeding OPs. So as it exists now, um, at what scale? Yeah, probably like a wholesale scale, where you like know you have a certain amount of things you need to deliver on a certain day. I can see how hybrids would be preferable in that regards. And I think a lot of those bigger growers, like they often don't like their options are limited based on the like the terms of their wholesale deal. Like the buyer might specify certain traits, or I think in some cases they even say like it has to be this variety.
Mhm.
And so farmers sometimes aren't given much agency in that scenario. Yeah, but yeah, hybrids can make sense on a 1 acre farm. OPs can make sense on a 100 acre farm. Again, it really just depends on like where the crop is ending up.
Like I strive to do breeding and selection work that will be relevant for a larger scale as well as smaller scale, especially when it comes to disease resistance. Um, and you know, I think that that ends up being true to some extent of, like there are some larger small farms that grow the varieties I've bred, but as far as very large scale, I don't think uh, they're necessarily adopting our stuff yet.
Okay. Let's jump to systems and resilience. Do OP seeds contribute to decentralized and pluralistic seed systems?
I would say yes.
Yeah.
Because yeah, if you can grow the vegetable and harvest seed from it, then it is you can have the seed like you have access. For hybrids, you growers do not have access to the parent lines that make that F1 crop. I mean, one could breed an open pollinated variety out of hybrids. People do it quite often. Um, it can be a lengthy project, and you're kind of starting from a shallower genetic pool than you would be with an OP. But yeah, for me, like it's about access. I really like OPs because anyone can grow them. Um, but hybrids don't necessarily have to be the opposite of that. Like hybrids are a tool. For me, it matters like who is using that tool and how. Like up until now, breeding companies do not really share their parent lines. Not to toot our own horn too much, and it didn't really work, but High Mowing years ago did breed a hybrid summer squash and also offered the parent lines for sale so people could like grow out the parent lines and make their own crosses and see what it was like. We stopped doing that because no one bought the parent lines. Not that many people were really interested in doing it. But I think it was a great way to just say like it doesn't like hybrids don't have to be this way. It's just the model that they've developed in. But like hybrids could be democratized too. Like it could be cool if a bunch of breeders like had their own like inbred parent lines and just shared them with each other to, breed with. Like that world is possible too.
Thanks for sharing that story because I saw that offered and then I saw it disappear and I always wondered if it was like nobody wants to put the work into doing that. So thanks. There's some great questions and we are only about 20 minutes from the end and we have some more questions here as well. So um, just with that in mind, I'll go through the rest, but the next one could be big, Aaron, so I'm happy to jump into it if you want, but we can skip that one.
Yeah, let's get to some questions.
All right.
Thanks for asking them.
No problem. But I would like to share the question with people because it's worth thinking about, which is should regional seed systems be the aspiration? Um, so that's, there's a lot to think about there. Um, Are there any other questions here that you guys would like to dig into? We haven't really talked about the cultural practices and dimensions. Um, how do farmer-led participatory models help maintain diversity, resilience, good functionality? Do you want to jump into any of these ones?
I mean, we could. I'm curious to hear what questions people have, though. Like
Yeah, me too.
we're here for you. Let's answer what we can.
Okay, I'm happy for Becca or Sarah to help
Yeah.
identify questions you think would be great, and if
Sure. There's been quite a few questions and some more are coming in. There was a question, would OPs be preferable in adapting more quickly to climate change? And there was another question around what happens to the genetic variation when you're doing roving. And I wondered if either of you wanted to sort of speak to that sort of breadth of genetic diversity that OPs hold, and yeah, move it over to you.
Yes. So can you repeat the first question? Are OPs more resilient in the face of climate change or anything?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
I would think so, yes, because they've got like their genetic depth is deep. Like hybrids, I don't want to get too much into it, and I'm not an expert, but hybrids come from two parents and they're inbred and inbred and inbred to like hone in on these several traits in each parent line. Inbred things are very weak. Like I've seen a few inbred parent lines, it can be shocking. Like that's the plant we're working with, they're weak sauce. And they only get the vigor when you cross the parents and the hybrid vigor. Um, but so yeah, like you can grow out F1s into F2s, F3s, keep going, and they can develop into some pretty robust, nice varieties, but it takes a while. For OPs, like there's a breadth and a depth of genetics within them. And if it's a good population, conditions can change drastically one year to the next, but if you're always selecting for the ones that do well in any scenario, like, and then they cross freely with each other like those like the varieties are going to have those tools in their kit. And so yes, I would much rather have OP varieties for such a scenario which we find ourselves in.
I think the decentralization of like OP seed systems, or the potential for decentralization, is really conducive to people being able to adapt their seeds to changing conditions and regional conditions and hyper regional conditions. Um, so yeah, resilience created by decentralization, and the empowerment created by that decentralization is also an important piece of why OPs are useful, or are essential. Um, and then the second question about roguing, um, which was, you know, are you losing genetic diversity when you rogue? Um, I think that you just have to be careful about your roguing and about your populations. You know, you don't want to start doing hard selections with a variety that you're not familiar with, um, until you're familiar with it, and you want to be just thoughtful and careful about selecting it too hard, you know, um, because you could be getting rid of something that you're going to need later.
Yeah, you both raised that question of empowerment around like just knowledge disappearing if more centralization happens. You mentioned that, Aaron, and Edmund, that response to was really beautiful, I think, and it kind of fits with this other two-part question, but I'll try and amalgamate it around how can farmers and growers support seed companies to take care and create new OP varieties? And if you could tell farmers one thing that would encourage more seed work to happen locally, what would it be? It's just a little bit of like, how do we encourage a system that you are envisioning here?
I do a fair few talks like this, and this question comes up a lot, and I have nothing new to say. But the thing I usually say is like just pick one crop that you are psyched about. Like you don't have to save all the seed that you plant. That'd be ridiculous. But like pick one crop that you really like. And either like fine tune a variety that you already like, or maybe cross a couple that you like. Like if every farmer stewarded like one or two varieties and the crops they really liked, like that would be a pretty strong regional seed system.
Certainly contribute to diversity.
And the other piece for me is just becoming knowledgeable about seed systems and about all the nuances of sourcing and um, you know, care about and ask for sourcing information and stewardship information.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Um, there's a question here that came up early on in the conversation around around caring for OP varieties. So many OP varieties are well known over long distances. Some are very specific to someone who has been caring for that for a long time, or sometimes that's like a very cultural crop. But in for folks who are producing seed, the question is, how do you know which variety description is the right one to follow, given all the variation across seed catalogs and databases? Is there a case for establishing a centralized reference database, perhaps through collaboration with seed companies or with public seed banks, gene banks, to ensure open pollinated variety descriptions remain accurate, traceable, and publicly accessible, so that you know what to select for and rogue out? And also for having a standardized variety description so customers know what to expect from that variety. Thoughts?
Perhaps. My first thought is, well, I would leave that up to the companies who are selling it to you. Like they should know how the population they're selling performs. And that may differ from other varieties of, I don't know, red Russian kale a little bit, but that might be good if they vary. I,
But if I am a seed company, I know this person is of a small seed company. If they're wondering what makes red Russian kale unique and what would they select for in that, have you ever thought about what are the criteria that these small seed companies should be looking for that maintains an OP true to type when there is such genetic diversity and adaptation is happening and climate change is happening? I think that's where the question was coming from.
To me, I don't, it's like I'm not sure there is a true version. There's like, especially with an older variety, there's a lot of different versions that start to show up of the same variety, and it's not necessarily that one is more true than the other.
Mm.
So I think people need to understand that um, two two things with the same name of the same variety name from different sources can actually be pretty different. So for people to start to think of it that way, um, and that's another reason why the sourcing, like knowledge about the sourcing and the stewardship is important. Um, yeah, I don't know that it's possible to, or even desirable to standardize.
If I think of Aaron, your suggestion of everybody here choosing one variety and stewarding, if we all chose red Russian kale and we came back in 50 years from now, our descriptions would all be slightly different and we'd be breeding heirlooms of tomorrow, I think, is maybe what you were getting at. So
yeah.
There's a question around, Edmund, you had been talking about how some of the reasons for seed companies to have hybrids is that they can maintain those inbred lines and um, be the sole producers of those hybrids in a way, and that's how they can make money. And it's harder for open pollinated stewardship and creation to happen because it doesn't have that same revenue stream. Would either of you have any suggestions as two folks who live south of the border from us here in Canada, and maybe have access to public plant breeders in a way that's unique to your country? Do you have any sort of thoughts about how institutionally and systemically we could support some of the OP systems that you mentioned? Or
Great.
relationships you've
Yeah.
had with institutions in different ways?
Yeah. I've gotten I've gotten a few farmer SARE grants to do breeding and trialing, and that has helped. But I would say it's been, you know, definitely not the majority of, the majority of it has been self-funded basically. Um, and um,
Have you had connections
so
with institutions, Edmund?
and self-funded in the sense of just not making very much money. Um, and I think another avenue is selling to seed companies, selling to other seed companies who are willing to pay a premium for the stewardship work and the breeding that you've done. Um, and there is kind of a not a legal system around that, but kind of an honor system between seed companies of compensating um, compensating breeders in that way. I'm not saying it always works, but it definitely it can work as a way to fund plant breeding, and we've sold varieties that way to other companies, and it's starting to generate revenue to be able to keep doing that work. We're actually going to start selling a couple varieties through high mowing this year. Um, so that's one answer. And then yeah, grants, and also in the past, I guess there was a much more robust system of public plant breeders at universities that was funded than there is now.
Mm.
That could be another piece of it to get back to that more.
Yeah, there's not as much of it now as there had been, but we get a lot of new material. The vast majority of it OPs from public plant breeding. It's like University of Wisconsin, Cornell, University of New Hampshire, University of North Carolina, uh, University of Oregon. I may be forgetting someone, but yeah, like they've bred varieties. We will trial them, and then license them from the universities. And so, like with the farmer breeders I mentioned, we're paying back 10% of the sales to the university so that they can continue producing more great varieties. Um, and yeah, for farmer bred varieties, we do that as well. If it's like a truly a new novel variety that they have bred, it gets trickier when it's like more of a stewardship situation. I wish there were um more money for that. And sometimes like we are able to um like increase the price we will pay based on work that a grower's done.
There's another question here around so you have mentioned growers who are doing contract growing and just growing out the open pollinated seeds. You've mentioned folks on the smaller scale doing selection and roguing, and local seed companies doing breeding and seed production. And Erin, you had mentioned that OP seed growing at scale. So not with the stock seed, not that stock seed selection, but just the growing of seed is done very internationally, and where the crop specifically will produce the best seed in the world. There was a question, it actually came up in our last webinar talking about hybrid seed, with a curiosity if anybody knew, like, just for like maybe 3 examples, where specifically those locations are that a majority of seed are growing for. And that was asked in a hybrid discussion, but also the question was for open pollinated seeds, where are those places in the world?
Mm-hmm.
I think this is an Aaron question because of your work.
I know a few. And given that there's not a lot of OP varieties out there, it might be more applicable to F1s, but Brussels sprouts, it's above 80% of the world's Brussels sprout seed is grown in the Skagit Valley in Washington State along the Salish Sea. I think spinach is also up there in terms of percentage and in that same region, just because of the like latitude requirements and the temperature requirements. Northwest Washington is very good for that sort of thing. Um, Again, as I mentioned, carrot seed is probably mostly California, Oregon, Washington.
Mm-hmm. Do you know
In
of
the,
places internationally that are sort of hubs of production?
I personally don't know as much about that.
That's okay.
But yeah, I would say I would hope Brussels sprouts and spinach are the outliers. I hope no other region is that dominant, providing the world seed of that crop.
Yeah, that 80% seems like a very risky business, putting all those eggs in one basket, as they say.
I think we're coming up to the end of our time. I just want to respect everybody's time. We have, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think 5 more minutes that we wanted to have people on the call.
I think maybe if there was just, if you had any closing thoughts, and all three of you, because you all grow seed and have knowledge of this, about, you know, if our goal here is to learn about where do our OP seeds come from, and understanding is the OP seed system, if there is any further thoughts related to that that we may not have covered.
I I really liked the question about should regional seed systems be our aspiration, only because I've always just thought, of course, they should be. Um, but there's an equitable way, I think, to work with seeds internationally and further abroad, that would benefit everybody. So it's a huge question. And
I like that.
I appreciate it being asked, and there needs to be some, there's all kinds of caveats to working internationally and making sure that we're still working in an equitable world and that we're not doing it for purely economic reasons. And I think there's a way to do it really well. So it feels like it might relate to some future webinar that we may be able to open up a can of worms at. Any closing thoughts, Aaron?
For all the prep I did, I should have anticipated this. Um, OPs are great. Grown seed is great. Anyone who's not doing it, you should try it. It is one of the most fulfilling, satisfying experiences I've ever had. Especially when like you have worked with a variety over years and developed a relationship with it. And then also just thinking about like the thousands of years of work and attention and care that preceded like our small slice of this variety story. Like that's meaningful. Like that's something to keep me going. So yeah, try it out if you haven't yet.
Okay, thanks
I
so
love
much.
that.
Yeah, and feel free to reach out by email, connect with your regional coordinator or in the chat, if you have any ideas for future webinars or how these can be improved. That would be great.
So much appreciation for the conversation in the chat, you three. So thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Edmund. Thanks, David, for facilitating.
I appreciate everyone coming and listening and engaging.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for showing up.
Okay. Take care, everyone.